he's just so smart. And when you begin to read the Gospels with those glasses on, that everything Jesus says is brilliant. And if I don't get it, he's not the problem.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the problem because I'm not smart enough or mature enough to catch what he's saying.
Welcome to the Loving God, Loving People podcast, where we talk about what it looks like to follow Jesus in our everyday lives and how, in the end, all that matters is God and people. Here's today's episode.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Today, let's talk about geniuses, Chad.
Geniuses.
Who would you put? Because I feel like we can overuse this word and we're like, oh, that's genius. Or, oh, man, that person's a genius. Who would you actually put in the category of, no, that person's a genius? Just somebody, let's start with somebody who's living today, right now, that you would say, no, I think that person's a genius.
Well, I'm going to say Jesus, right? Because this is a Sun Valley podcast.
I know.
And he's living today.
So, Chad, let's talk through how podcasts work and kind of the arc of, where we're going. Of course, we're going to land
if you were asking my 19-year-old son right now, he would say Kanye.
He would say Kanye.
And then I'd have to go, Josh, I got some other thoughts on Kanye that might be outside of genius.
Are you not a Kanye fan?
Well,
this is where we got to be real right now on the podcast.
There's been a few songs that I like it, and I think musically he's done some things that might be in that, but in this case there might be a difference between genius and wisdom, and Jesus loves Kanye, and so do I.
All right.
That was a sidebar. I don't even know why I went there.
Yeah, well,
because I didn't know you were going to ask me about it.
You broke the mold because you went ahead and jumped the gun with Jesus. We're going to get there. But who would you say today that you would put in the category of, man, that person's a genius?
Yeah. I tell you who came to mind, and I've talked about him before on the podcast and, name drop, whatever. I actually think Rick Warren's a genius. Mm-hmm. He's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And anytime I've been in the room with him, it just seems obvious that he's the smartest person in the room. Mm-hmm. When I've been around him, frankly, I feel a little inferior, right? Just in conversation. And I realized one time, it's not because he's making me feel that way. It's because I am, right? He's one of these guys that can read a book in a day. There's been some talk about somebody else with that, but he actually can and can give you recall, right? From something he read years before.
Yeah.
So I think I'll change your question. I think he's one of the smartest people I've ever met in real life.
Okay.
And I think he's legit smart. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about more historically? Like, is there somebody that you go, okay, this person, like Albert Einstein, obviously he's at the top of most people's lists, or who would you put in that genius category?
Yeah, well, immediately who comes to mind with that would be some of the musicians that were just naturally talented. Mm-hmm. You got Mozart playing the piano at 3 years of age. Right, but that's genius in a category.
Sure, the Beatles, who they sit down and all of a sudden it's a hit, and then they're just messing around and it's a hit, and they're constantly producing hits.
Yeah, you said the Beatles. I don't know that I would. But to your point,
hang on, you wouldn't put the Beatles in genius category.
Do I think individually any one of them are in the genius category? Well, I did say Kanye. So, yeah, I get your point. They definitely knew how to do music in their time and put it together, and it worked. Genius is such a there's all-encompassing just smart, right?
Yeah. And
then there's brilliant in a niche.
Yeah.
Right? So I think definitely the Beatles were brilliant in a niche. Mm-hmm. And there's like, talking about Mozart, there's prodigies. Mm-hmm. Right? that's just God-given brilliance in a niche. Who would you say genius?
I would put like C.S. Lewis into that. Just the way he sees things, the way he thinks, the way he can articulate things. And right now I'm reading some stuff of his that I had never read before. That's new to me, and I'm like, this is really brilliant. Like, when you start like kind of reading in between the lines and going, because it's fiction that he wrote. Just like Chronicles of Narnia. And again, there's just a brilliance to it. So he's one that I would put in that category. Of course, there's innovators, there's inventors, that I would go, okay, they were next level, Leonardo da Vinci or, whoever, whether it's art, whether it's science, he's kind of a blend of both.
Well, Elon Musk is brilliant.
He is, yeah.
I mean, you can't get around it. He wouldn't be where he is without it. Mm-hmm. And of course, you had the drive and the perseverance and all that side of it. You mentioned C.S. Lewis. That made me think of Tim Keller.
Yep.
Who is now he's doing some other things. He was a pastor of a Presbyterian church in New York for a long time. But modern day C.S. Lewis. Mm-hmm. If you've never read Tim Keller and you're more of an intellectual kind of person, I would encourage you to do that. But the thing about people like that, if you read their books, right, you'll read it. And then you're like, oh, I got it. And then years later, you read it again, and you're like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
And then even years after that, you read it again, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Because you think you're comprehending it, but you don't understand the depth and richness of what they were seeing in that moment as they read it. I mean, the Bible's that way, right?
Yeah.
There's so much brilliance in the Bible that I can read something, but then years later, man, it means something, not necessarily different, but the scope of it is different, just in the way that it hits me of how brilliant it actually is. And then some more time passes, and it's even more brilliant. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I was listening to a guy talk, and he was talking about in history, you have lists of who are geniuses over the last however many, thousands of years. And he was shocked to go, Jesus is never on any of those lists.
Yeah.
He's always excluded from those lists. And of course, they didn't survey you and ask you who you thought was genius because that was your first person out of the gate.
Sure. They never asked me who the sexiest man alive is either. It's like they don't even include me in one of the options.
Paul Rudd this last year, which, man.
That's nuts.
Really?
Like my wife said the same thing. We saw it, and she's like, Paul Rudd?
Yeah.
Anyway.
I don't know why I went
there. That was a sidebar.
Yeah. So
there's hope for you, Robert.
But Jesus is never included in these lists, yet he's had more influence, more impact.
Yeah.
And when you study the content of what he said and what he did, not even just in light of the culture and the time period, but in light of all of history, it truly is brilliant. And it's earth-shattering. In fact, most of when we think of modern society, the principles that we are built on are the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yet we exclude him from those lists.
Well, and most people don't realize that, mm-hmm. right?
Well, that's creativity, right? Forgetting your source. And
sure.
So there's a whole lot of creativity in history that was just forgetting that.
Well, we all think the values of the Western world just showed up, mm-hmm. but come to find out, you can trace it back to Jesus. Mm-hmm. Primarily, and then some even before that, and just Jewish teaching. But
mm-hmm.
but I mean, it all comes out of the Bible, mm-hmm. the Western value system.
And it's funny too, because even in modern psychology, and as we begin to understand just how human beings work, and we're doing these studies and we're making these discoveries, lo and behold, after we spent millions of dollars on research on what makes a life the most satisfying life. Jesus taught us that 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
and lo and behold, all these things that we discover, quote unquote, have always just been there.
He was right again.
Yep.
Another brilliant person who graduated to go be with Jesus a few years ago, his name's Dallas Willard, mm-hmm. and he was a professor. He wrote a few best-selling books, but one of the books he wrote is called The Divine Conspiracy. Mm-hmm. Another recommend from me if you're more of an intellectual type. That is a phenomenal book. But I've said before,
so Chad and I have worked together for 18 years now, and when I was in my 20s, Chad's like, "Hey, I'm going to read this book. You should read it as well." And I don't know if you remember this, but I read Divine Conspiracy, and I remember as a 20-something being like, I don't understand half of this, and going back and rereading it. To your point of the other authors, now I go back and I'm like, oh, there's so much gold all throughout this book. Yeah, Dallas Willard is in a category of his own. He's discipled lots of guys who now have discipled guys
sure.
who are writing best-selling books, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, his The Divine Conspiracy is one of those books. You need to read it about every 5 years. Mm-hmm. And then it will take you a little deeper. But if you've ever heard me, if you're a Sun Valley person, and you've ever heard me say, Jesus is not just nice, he's brilliant, mm-hmm. that's a Dallas Willard quote. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've ever given him credit, but I got that concept from him. Mm-hmm. And he was the first person. I read that book when I was, oh gosh, it wasn't too long after it came out. I was probably 24, 25, and mm-hmm. it was eye-opening for me. Because what he says in there is that we all think of Jesus as being nice, because Jesus says all these things, love your enemy and bless those who persecute you. And we think, oh, that's cute, Jesus, but this is the real world, right? Jesus said, that was nice with your Birkenstock sandals and your robe and your long hair and your beard and your little hippie life. But, I'm a CEO of a company. So, and we separate that because we don't understand, even, let's just go with that one, of how brilliant that actually is. Okay, so let's just break it down. So love your enemy and bless those who persecute you. Okay, what you just did was defeat your enemy without firing a shot.
Yeah.
The best way to defeat an enemy is to make them your friend.
Which is an Abraham Lincoln quote, which he stole from Jesus.
Absolutely. Well, all
it's
brilliance,
one of his most famous quotes.
All brilliance ultimately goes back to Jesus, right? But we don't see it that way. We think nice little bumper sticker fish on a car, He's just so smart. And when you begin to read the Gospels with those glasses on, that everything Jesus says is brilliant. And if I don't get it, he's not the problem.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the problem because I'm not smart enough or mature enough to catch what he's saying.
Hang on. That's you said that so quick. And not to boost your ego too much, but that was brilliant. If Jesus says something and you're like, I don't know if I agree with that or I don't understand that, you probably need to go reread it and reconsider it or apply it and then go, oh, now I see it. Because the problem's not with Jesus or what he taught.
Well, again, it's because we have this perception, this perspective that was 2,000 years ago, right? And he was living a hippie lifestyle and, but that's just not the case. He's brilliant about everything, right? Jesus is the most influential, successful, impactful leader that has ever walked on the face of the earth. If you want leadership, look at Jesus, right? And yet, what do? Oh, George Patton and, all these different people. Jesus has had more influence than anybody you can think of, right, combined.
And a lot of those leaders, if you look at their story and you actually dig into them a little bit, there's a whole wake of bodies behind those leaders,
of
absolutely. People's lives that were destroyed. Or, Jesus doesn't have that. The only body that was left in the wake was his own when he sacrificed it. But he wasn't, burning through people for his leadership and influence. He was doing it a totally different way than a lot of these leaders that we tend to look to and go, oh, man, Jack Welch, or oh, man, this person, the incredible leader.
Well, and here's the other thing. With Jesus, it was 3 years of effort.
Yeah.
Now he did die on the cross and rise again, so the resurrection helps.
Yeah, that third year was a big one.
Helps with that influence. Yeah. But yeah, man, it's 3 years of professional ministry leadership, and here
in a day and age with no internet.
Well, we are.
Yeah.
Here we are sitting in the year 2022.
Yeah.
On a podcast using technology that they couldn't even dream of that day and time, and we're talking about this man who's changed our lives.
Yeah.
I mean, that is some effective, brilliant leadership.
Yeah.
So he's not just nice; he's brilliant.
All right. So if you could, and I'm not going to make you pick your top 5 things, but if you could just rattle off, what are some of the things that you would go, okay, this is a brilliant, and I know it's all brilliant, but this is a brilliant, applicable, right now, this week, we could take what Jesus taught us, put it into practice, and our lives would be better if we did these things. What are some of those things that come to mind when you think of, all right, what did Jesus teach? What did he guide us in? What are some of the easy steps we can take or principles or whatever? And easy is maybe not the right word, but simple.
Yeah. So the thing that popped into my brain just now, and by the way, for those of you guys who listen to the podcast, there is no preparation for this thing. We just go at it. So when I say, that's right off the top of my head, that's real. What popped in my brain just now, Robert, as you asked that question, was right in the middle of the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us of our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. It's the brilliance of understanding what forgiveness actually is. Just think of that line. Forgive us of our debts.
Yeah.
So that's us and God, as we also have forgiven our debtors. What does it mean to forgive? Well, according to Jesus, it means to cancel a debt, which means somebody owes you something. And so right now, if you're struggling with bitterness, Jesus in his brilliance would say, here's your struggle. They owe you. And so you have to define it. What is it that they owe you? Because if you're going to cancel the debt and you're going to experience forgiveness, you have to know what you're forgiving them for, which sounds so simple, and yet it's so brilliant. And the only way you can be free and even close that account, because for somebody listening right now, there's been something that's had a grip on your life for a long, long time. And even though that person is no longer in your life, they still have control over your life because that account is still open. And so Jesus would say to forgive is to cancel the debt. What do they owe you? They're not ever going to give it to you, right? So you cancel the debt, and in that you can close the account.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, that's one thing, right,
Yeah.
out of a million, but that's what popped in my mind.
Well, yeah, and even just those phrases tied together, that there's a connection between God forgiving our debt as we forgive the debt of others.
Oh, yeah.
There's, you could zoom in on these little statements that, took them a second, 2 seconds to say, and you go, okay, there is a connection between us learning to receive God's forgiveness in our lives. That's what empowers us to then forgive others. And Jesus gives analogies for that. He helps explain, okay, if you were forgiven millions of dollars, why wouldn't you turn around and forgive the hundreds of dollars that this person owes you? And he gives this example, and he gives these illustrations. And again, you go, wow. Now that I'm actually having to do that, I understand the brilliance of it. Now that I'm actually having to take these steps and apply this, I go, yeah, those two sentences are linked together. And these are, two sides of the same coin, and understanding this is how life works. And Jesus, if you understand the theology, it's not just that he said a bunch of brilliant things and Jesus was just some guy who was really smart. If you truly believe that Jesus is God in the flesh, that means he has perspective that you and I don't have. That means he has understanding that you and I don't have. And again, to your point earlier, if you go, okay, I don't actually understand how that works, do what he says, and it'll start to make sense. There's a whole lot of things that Jesus says, okay, do these things. And until you actually take the steps to do it and experience the freedom of forgiving somebody else and go, man, they don't have control of my life anymore. I didn't understand why Jesus wanted me to do that, but now that I've done it, life is a whole lot better. Understand that he knows what you don't know, he sees what you don't see, and he can be trusted, and he has your best in mind always.
Just putting more fuel on the fire of the brilliance of Jesus. His first miracle, he turns H2O into Merlot, which means this man that lived a couple thousand years ago understood molecules, and he's the master of molecules, that he could do that transition. The fact that he could cause the blind to see and the lame to walk and the deaf to hear means that he understood physiology and anatomy and was in control of it. Right? The fact that somehow he could make a statement and calm the wind and the waves, means that he understands nature.
Yeah. To go metaphysical, he was able to connect soul and body when it was disconnected. So you have Lazarus who dies.
Yeah.
And you have that separation, which if ever you've been around somebody who's passed away, you look at them and you go, that person's not here anymore. Their body's here, but that person is gone. Jesus is in control of the metaphysical.
Yeah.
We're going to go all the way there too. And to be able to go, okay, soul, body, I'm going to reconnect those two things together.
So when Jesus says, to find your life, you must lose it. To live, you first must die. He's not being cute. He didn't say that to, put on a bumper sticker so people could smile and go, what a neat idea, right? He's saying this brilliant thing that you and I, our souls don't really begin to live until we live for something bigger than ourselves. He's actually speaking to all the 2-year-olds right now who are in their terrible twos, figuring out life's not about them. And yet you and I, right? So I'm in my 40s, and I still get upset that life doesn't revolve around me.
Yeah.
And the brilliance of Jesus remains, to find your life, you must lose it. To live, you first must die. There's so much brilliance about Jesus. So again, in the words of Dallas Willard, I would totally get rid of this "he's just nice" idea, right? He's super smart, and the truth is, if you don't think he's smart, you won't trust him, and that's a mistake because he knows more than you, he sees more than you, he's more powerful than you, and he loves you. So you might as well just trust him and surrender to the brilliance of Jesus.
Yeah, I don't love how I framed it earlier, but it's not just about, okay, your life will be better. To your point earlier, what Jesus is saying, it's not that he came to give us a better life. He came to give us a new life. It's completely different.
Real life.
Yeah. And again, only brilliance is going to get us there. It's something totally different than just, okay, my life's going to be mildly improved, or it's going to be 10% better in this category. It's a complete transformation from the inside out when we begin to follow Jesus and trust him.
Yeah. So in this series, you and Megan and I, different weeks, we'll be talking about the brilliance of Jesus. So I'm gonna make one more selling point here. You realize that when you give your life to Jesus and you listen to him and you receive what he says and you practice it, you're getting smarter. And the longer that you follow Jesus, the smarter you will be, because you are learning from the literal master.
Yeah.
And so as you become a disciple, an apprentice of his, you begin to see what he sees. When you begin to see what he sees, you're seeing with eyes of brilliance. And it's just such a beautiful thing. So you want to get smarter? Follow Jesus. You want to experience peace? Receive the love of Jesus. I mean, he is the master of life. And, could I be an apprentice of Rick Warren? Could I be an apprentice of Tim Keller? Could I be an apprentice of Elon Musk? Could I be an apprentice of different people that we've mentioned? Yeah. But why would I waste my time with those idiots? I want to be an apprentice of the master of all things.
The author.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's beautiful is by the power of his Spirit, he makes me a little more like him.
Yeah.
So I want to get smarter.
That's good. I don't have anything to add to that. You got any closing thoughts? Or you want to just drop the mic and walk away?
I just drop the mic and walk away. It's the brilliance of Jesus. Go on the journey with us. This is a great series to invite somebody to as we talk about some of the things that Jesus taught that are just so genius.
Thanks for watching this week's episode of the Loving God, Loving People podcast. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and click the bell so that you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you found value in this conversation, we'd love it if you would like this video, leave us a comment, and even share it with a friend. Doing that will help more people meet, know, and follow Jesus. And lastly, you are always welcome to join us each week for one of our services right here live on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.